Who turned off the Mercer Ridge beacon? The question came through my phone at 7:48 that evening, 6 minutes after darkness settled over the hill and the red light that had blinked there for decades failed to appear. I stood beside an empty concrete footing with Colorado wind pushing cold air through my work jacket. The smell of diesel still hung over the grass. Fresh equipment tracks crossed my gravel access road, and sections of galvanized steel rested near a contractor truck waiting to be hauled away. 30 feet from me, Rebecca Langford leaned against her white luxury sport utility vehicle with a blue Homeowners Association binder tucked beneath one arm. "You can thank me later, Ethan," she said. "Summit Crest finally has the view it was promised." I stared at the open electrical conduit where the beacon controls had been disconnected, then looked downhill. Summit Crest Estates spread across the slope below Mercer Ridge, rows of expensive homes glowing beneath a copper sunset. Their western windows faced the mountains. Rebecca had spent years selling that view. I turned away from her and focused on the call. "Who am I speaking with?" "Michael Grant, Airport Operations. We have a report that the Mercer Ridge beacon is dark. Was there scheduled maintenance tonight?" I looked at the removed tower sections. "No." "Electrical failure?" "No." Rebecca walked closer, her shoes pressing into the damp soil. "Ethan, please do not make this dramatic," she said. I raised one finger without looking at her. Michael continued. "Then what happened?" I could hear office noise behind him, keyboards, a radio, somebody speaking several feet away. The kind that told me this call had nothing to do with Rebecca's landscaping complaints or Summit Crest property values. "A contractor removed it today," I said. "Removed the beacon?" "The entire structure." "Who authorized that?" I looked directly at Rebecca. She smiled and tapped the blue binder against her palm. 3 months of certified letters, nuisance notices, board emails, and threats flashed through my mind. I remembered asking her repeatedly to show me where Summit Crest Authority crossed my property line. She never had. She had simply decided that repeating the word community often enough made Mercer Ridge hers to manage. "The Homeowners Association president says her board authorized it," I said. Michael asked for my full name and confirmed the property address. Then his tone changed. Still calm, but sharper. "Mr. Cole, do not alter anything at the site tonight. Preserve whatever records you have regarding the removal. I need to check our files." Rebecca gave an impatient sigh. "It was an obsolete light," she said loudly enough for the phone to catch it. Michael stopped speaking for half a second. "Who said that?" "The woman who ordered it removed. He asked me to stay available and ended the call." I lowered the phone. Rebecca looked toward the mountains, admiring the clean horizon she had wanted for so long. "See," she said. "Better already." I looked at my watch, then at the bare footing, then at her confident smile. 3 months earlier, she had called it an ugly old light. Standing there at 7:48, I realized she still had no idea why someone at the airport had noticed within minutes that it was gone. 3 months earlier, Mercer Ridge was still quiet enough that I could hear the beacon relay click from my workshop when the evening cycle started. I had owned those 12 acres for 11 years, but the land had belonged to my family since 1987, when my father bought the ridge before Summit Crest Estates existed anywhere except on somebody's development map. My name is Ethan Cole. I was 45 years old, and I had spent more than 20 years working as an electrical and infrastructure contractor. Pump controls, industrial lighting, buried conduit, backup systems, service panels. Nothing glamorous. I liked equipment that did what it was supposed to do and records that proved when it had been serviced. My father, Walter, was the reason for that. He could tolerate a scratched truck, a crooked fence post, even coffee spilled across his workbench, but he hated missing paperwork. "If it has wires, ownership, or history attached to it, document it," he used to tell me. He kept maintenance logs in a thick black binder inside the gray metal cabinet above our workbench. Dates, parts, inspection notes, old diagrams, receipts, property documents. I continued the habit after he died. Every spring, I inspected the beacon structure, checked the enclosure, cleaned the lens, examined the grounding connection, and recorded the work. It had been part of the ridge for as long as I could remember. Then Summit Crest grew beneath us. First came survey stakes, then graders, then streets with names like Aspen View Drive and Golden Peak Lane. Within a few years, the southern slope was covered with stone front houses, wide decks, landscaped yards, and windows designed to capture the mountain sunset. Rebecca Langford arrived after most of the construction was finished. She was 52, a luxury real estate broker, and she bought one of the largest homes near the upper edge of the subdivision. Within 18 months, she became president of the Homeowners Association. The first time she came to my gate, I was replacing a weathered junction box near the workshop. I smelled her perfume before I heard her shoes on the gravel. She wore a cream jacket, carried a blue binder, and looked past me toward the beacon before introducing herself. "Ethan Cole. That is me." She smiled. "Rebecca Langford. Summit Crest." She said the name as if I should recognize it as an institution instead of the subdivision downhill. "Beautiful property," she continued. "You have probably noticed how much the neighborhood has improved this side of the ridge." I looked at the rows of rooftops below. "It has definitely gotten busier." Her smile held, but only barely. Then she pointed toward the tower. "I actually came about that light." I set my screwdriver on the workbench. "What about it?" "Several homeowners have mentioned the nighttime flash. It interrupts the western view." That was the first time anyone had complained about it. Rebecca asked whether I could switch it off after sunset, or perhaps remove it entirely if it was no longer useful. I told her I was not changing anything based on a neighborhood preference. She looked surprised by how quickly I answered. "You understand those homes represent a significant investment. So does this property." The wind moved through the dry grass between us. Rebecca glanced toward the beacon again. "It is just an old light, Ethan." I looked through the workshop doorway at the gray cabinet containing my father's black binder. Then I looked back at her. "Rebecca, leave it alone." 2 weeks later, the first Summit Crest envelope appeared at my gate. The envelope was bright yellow, the kind of color designed to make a problem feel official before you even opened it. I found it clipped to my gate on a Monday morning while carrying coffee toward the workshop. Across the top was the Summit Crest Estates logo. Beneath it, in bold letters, were the words "Exterior Lighting Violation." The letter claimed my beacon created excessive nighttime illumination visible from association property and requested corrective action within 10 business days. Before answering, I pulled my property survey from the gray cabinet. Mercer Ridge ended 12 acres in sidelines that had been recorded long before Summit Crest poured its first driveway. Their nearest boundary stopped downhill. I sent Rebecca one question. "Please identify the recorded covenant or property agreement granting Summit Crest Estates enforcement authority over Mercer Ridge." Her response arrived 40 minutes later. She wrote about neighborhood standards, homeowner expectations, architectural consistency, and protecting property values. A week later, another envelope appeared. This one called the beacon a visual nuisance. Then came a $500 fine for non-compliant exterior lighting. I mailed it back with a copy of the parcel map. Rebecca responded by increasing the pressure. She claimed the association had authority over conditions that materially affected Summit Crest residents, even when those conditions originated outside the subdivision. I asked her to provide the legal document supporting that claim. She sent 3 pages from the Homeowners Association rules. None mentioned my land. By then, I understood what was really bothering her. Rebecca had started listing 2 luxury homes near the upper street, and both advertisements emphasized unobstructed western views. One Saturday afternoon, I was servicing the beacon enclosure when her white sport utility vehicle stopped near my gate. She walked uphill carrying that blue binder. "You are making this unnecessarily difficult," she said. I tightened the enclosure cover and stepped down from the service platform. "Show me where your authority crosses my property line." Her jaw tightened. "This is bigger than your property line. Property lines usually matter when you are telling somebody what to do on their property." She opened the binder and pointed to a section about community appearance. "The board has an obligation to protect homeowners." I looked at the page, then at her. "Those homeowners are in Summit Crest. I am not." The wind carried the smell of pine and dry grass across the ridge. Behind Rebecca, the afternoon sun reflected from rows of expensive windows. She lowered the binder. "There are ways to address a nuisance when an owner refuses to cooperate." That sentence was different from the others. It was not a request anymore. That evening, I created a folder on my computer labeled Summit Crest Correspondence. I saved every email. I scanned every notice. I backed up my gate cameras and added a second camera facing the beacon access road. My father had taught me that arguments disappear the moment people decide to remember them differently. Documents do not. 2 days later, Rebecca emailed me a contractor estimate for removing what she called an abandoned decorative tower. Then I stopped trying to convince her she was wrong. Instead, I decided to find out exactly how far she was willing to put that mistake in writing. The contractor estimate gave me exactly what I needed: a company name, a proposed removal date, and Rebecca's confidence in writing. I did not call her. I opened my email and asked one question. Has the Summit Crest Board formally authorized removal of the beacon from Mercer Ridge? Her answer came 26 minutes later. Yes, the board has approved corrective action if you continue refusing voluntary compliance. I printed it. Then I asked, are you personally directing the contractor to perform that removal? She replied, as association president, I am authorized to execute the board's decision. I printed that too. My third question was even simpler. To confirm, Summit Crest considers this an official association enforcement action? Rebecca answered with one word. Correct. I placed them in a manila folder and wrote Summit Crest removal authorization across the front. After that, I requested the board meeting minutes. Rebecca sent them the following morning, probably believing the record would intimidate me. The minutes showed a vote authorizing nuisance abatement related to the beacon. Her name appeared beside the motion. Her approval appeared in the vote. The contractor estimate was attached. What the documents did not contain was just as important. No recorded easement giving Summit Crest access to Mercer Ridge. No property agreement placing my land under association control. No written authorization from me. No survey showing the beacon inside their boundary. Rebecca thought she was documenting her power. I thought she was documenting her decision. That distinction mattered enough that I built a simple evidence index beside the folder. Date, sender, claim, response, supporting document. It was the same method I used when troubleshooting electrical systems. Start with what happened, trace every connection backward, and never assume the loudest explanation is the correct one. I also downloaded fresh county parcel records and compared them with Dad's survey. The lines matched. Summit Crest still ended downhill. No new easement had appeared, no amendment had moved the boundary, and no recorded document gave Rebecca the access she kept claiming. I called the county planning desk and asked whether any application involving Mercer Ridge had been filed by the association. Nothing. The cleaner the public record became, the stranger Rebecca's confidence looked. I did not send her those findings. She had already been given the survey and ignored it. From that point forward, my job was not to win an argument at the gate. My job was to make sure that if she acted, nobody could later confuse what she knew, what she claimed, and what the records actually showed. That afternoon, I called the contractor listed on the estimate. His name was Eric Dawson. I told him I owned Mercer Ridge and had not authorized anyone to enter the property or remove equipment. His tone immediately became cautious. He said Summit Crest had represented the work as an association-approved nuisance removal and claimed it had access authority. Before your crew comes onto my land, I said, verify that claim independently. Eric promised to review the paperwork. I wrote down the time of the call and saved his contact information. Then I checked both security cameras. One covered the lower gate. The second covered the gravel road leading toward the beacon. I tested the timestamps, confirmed the backup storage, and cleaned the lens on each camera. A few days later, Rebecca appeared at my gate again. She did not come inside. She stood on the other side, holding her blue binder against her hip. You have until Friday, she said. After that, the board will resolve this. I leaned against the workshop door. You are still planning to send people onto Mercer Ridge. You have been notified. That was not my question. Her expression hardened. Yes, Ethan. We are proceeding. I nodded once. All right. That is all you have to say? I already told you what matters. And what is that? The beacon relay clicked behind me as evening approached. A second later, the familiar red light came alive above the ridge. I looked up at it, then back at Rebecca. Do not touch it. She turned toward her white sport utility vehicle without answering. Then I went back inside, placed the newest note beside her emails and meeting minutes, and closed the folder. She had put every step of it in writing. Friday morning began with a camera alert at 8:12. I was 27 miles away at a municipal pump facility, standing beside an open control cabinet with the smell of hot wiring, insulation, and machine oil in the air, when my phone vibrated against the workbench. The lower gate camera showed a white contractor truck stopped on Mercer Ridge. Behind it sat a compact excavator on a trailer. Rebecca stood beside the driver's door in her cream jacket, blue binder tucked beneath her arm. Eric Dawson was there too. I opened the second camera feed and watched Rebecca point uphill, toward the beacon. I called Eric immediately. Eric, this is Ethan Cole. Are you at my property? His answer came carefully. Mr. Cole, Summit Crest provided additional documentation saying the board has authority to address the structure and access the site. Did they provide a recorded easement? Silence. They provided an association authorization and a site map. I am the property owner, and I am telling you again that I have not granted access. Verify the parcel boundary before you proceed. Eric said he understood. I saved the call information, then contacted the county non-emergency line and reported an unauthorized contractor entry dispute on private property. At 8:34, Rebecca held up several pages near the gate while speaking to Eric. At 8:47, the truck entered. At 9:06, the excavator followed the gravel road uphill. Every movement carried a timestamp. I saved copies to remote storage before leaving the pump facility. By the time I reached Mercer Ridge shortly after noon, the beacon had been lowered in a controlled removal and separated into transportable sections. The workers were packing equipment. Eric met me near the workshop with an uneasy expression. Rebecca represented that the association had documented access authority, he said. Keep every document she gave you. I told him. I intend to. Rebecca stood near her white sport utility vehicle, watching the western horizon as if she had personally improved Colorado. There, she said when I approached. No more flashing light in everyone's sunset. I looked at the empty footing. The conduit had been disconnected. Fresh equipment tracks pressed into the grass. You authorized this today? I asked. She gave me an irritated look. We have already established that. I want to hear it clearly. She lifted the blue binder. Yes, Ethan. I authorized the contractor under the board's decision. I checked the time on my phone and saved a note. Then I photographed the site, the vehicles, the footing, and the removed components. By late afternoon, everyone had left except me. Sunset came slowly, spreading orange across the mountains. For as long as I could remember, that was when the beacon became part of the landscape. The relay would click. The red light would appear. That evening, there was only darkness above Mercer Ridge. I stood beside the concrete footing and checked my watch. 7:42. 6 minutes later, my phone rang. Mr. Cole, this is Michael Grant with Airport Operations. I looked downhill. Rebecca had returned and was standing beside her white vehicle, admiring the clean horizon she had wanted. Michael's next words pulled my attention back to the phone. We received a report that the Mercer Ridge beacon is dark. Was there scheduled maintenance? I looked at Rebecca, then at the empty footing. No, I said. Someone removed it. And suddenly the argument was no longer between me and Summit Crest. Michael asked me to stay near the site while he checked the airport records. Rebecca remained downhill for another minute, then drove away without saying anything else. Her white sport utility vehicle disappeared between the Summit Crest houses just as the last orange light faded behind the mountains. I walked into my workshop and switched on the fluorescent lights. Michael called back 12 minutes later. Ethan, do you have historical records for that site? I looked toward the gray metal cabinet above Dad's old workbench. Probably more than you want. Look for anything involving the beacon, the ridge location, access agreements, maintenance records, or airport references. I pulled open the cabinet. Dad's black binder sat behind a stack of electrical manuals, its corners worn smooth from years of use. I set it on the bench and opened it beneath the white fluorescent light. The first pages were familiar. Inspection dates, lamp replacements, grounding tests, wiring diagrams. Dad's handwriting filled the margins in blue ink. Farther back, I found older documents I had barely looked at since inheriting the property. There was a survey map, a site diagram, correspondence from decades earlier, and an agreement referencing the hilltop location. A line on the diagram connected Mercer Ridge to an airport reference number. I read the number to Michael. His keyboard clicked rapidly over the phone. Then he stopped. That matches. Matches what? The beacon is still listed in our local operational records as a recognized visual reference associated with Mercer Ridge. The arrangement is old, but the site was never simply erased from the records. So Rebecca removed something the airport still tracks? We received a report that the expected visual reference was absent after dark. That is why operations contacted you. I need to review the historical file before I tell you anything beyond that. Nobody had some magical alarm connected to my workshop. Someone familiar with the local reference had noticed the light missing, reported it, and airport operations had checked the site record. Michael told me not to disturb the footing and asked me to preserve everything connected to the removal. I looked at the manila folder beside Dad's binder. That part is easy. I spread Rebecca's paperwork across the workbench. Her first violation notice, her nuisance claim, the contractor estimate, board meeting minutes, 3 emails confirming that removal was an official Summit Crest action, her written statement that she was directing the contractor. Then I opened the security archive on my computer. At 8:12, Rebecca was at my gate. At 8:47, the contractor entered. At 9:06, the excavator moved uphill. Every frame carried a timestamp. I called Eric and asked him to preserve the site map and authorization Rebecca had provided. He agreed immediately. Then I photographed Dad's documents and backed up everything in 2 separate locations. Dad's black binder represented decades of maintenance, boundaries, and recorded history. Rebecca's blue binder represented 3 months of demands based on authority she had never proved. I placed the old Mercer Ridge survey beside her signed authorization. One document showed where Summit Crest ended. The other showed exactly who had decided that boundary did not matter. Rebecca thought she had removed a light. What she had really done was leave me a paper trail. By 8:40 the next morning, Mercer Ridge had 3 official vehicles parked along the gravel road, and none of them belonged to Summit Crest. Michael Grant arrived first in a dark airport operations vehicle, a county engineering truck. Followed, then a sedan carrying a records specialist who had brought copies of the current parcel maps. Michael walked directly to the empty beacon footing. He photographed the conduit, measured the remaining base, and compared the identification information from my photographs with the airport file he carried. Then we went into the workshop. I placed Dad's black binder on the left side of the workbench and Rebecca's documents on the right. The county engineer unfolded the current survey between them. Summit Crest ends here, he said, running a finger along the southern boundary. Mercer Ridge is outside the association parcel area. That is what I told Rebecca from the beginning. Michael opened the historical records, and the beacon site is still documented in the operational file. Any permanent change should have been coordinated before removal. Before anyone could say more, tires sounded outside. Rebecca's white sport utility vehicle climbed the road. She stepped out wearing her cream jacket and carrying the blue binder against her chest. "Ethan, what is going on?" she asked. Michael introduced himself. The county engineer did the same. Rebecca immediately opened her binder. Summit Crest has authority to address conditions that negatively affect community standards and property values. The engineer tapped the survey. "Does your association own this parcel?" "No, but our governing documents allow enforcement when neighboring conditions create a nuisance." "Do those documents grant access across Mr. Cole's property?" Rebecca flipped several pages. "The board approved corrective action." Michael looked at her. "Did you personally authorize the contractor?" She did not hesitate. "Yes." "Did Mr. Cole give you permission to remove the beacon?" "He was notified repeatedly." Michael's expression did not change. "That was not the question." Rebecca looked at me, then back at him. He refused to cooperate. Then another truck pulled outside. Eric Dawson walked in carrying a manila folder. He placed the contractor paperwork on the workbench and removed the site map Summit Crest had provided. The county engineer laid it beside the recorded survey. Rebecca's version showed a highlighted area around the beacon labeled as a community impact zone. The recorded survey showed something much simpler. Summit Crest stopped downhill. "Who provided this map?" the engineer asked. Eric pointed toward Rebecca. "The association president." Rebecca tightened her grip on the blue binder. "That map was prepared for planning purposes." The engineer looked at her. "Planning does not move a property line." Michael then placed Rebecca's signed work order beside Dad's historical site record. Rebecca stared at them for several seconds before asking the question she should have asked 3 months earlier. "What exactly was that beacon?" Michael closed the airport file halfway. A documented visual reference that remained in our local operational records. That is why its disappearance was reported after dark. The confidence drained from her eyes as she looked toward the empty footing outside. She had arrived carrying a binder she believed could explain everything. Instead, Every page on my workbench led back to the same fact. Summit Crest had never crossed my property line on paper. Rebecca had simply decided it could. Rebecca left Mercer Ridge before noon, but the paperwork followed her downhill. By Monday morning, Summit Crest homeowners had received an emergency meeting notice. A neighbor named Thomas Avery forwarded me a copy because he had been questioning Rebecca's enforcement decisions for months. The notice described the beacon removal as a property boundary misunderstanding. There had been no misunderstanding. I had sent Rebecca the survey. I had asked for proof of authority. I had warned the contractor. She had confirmed the board decision in writing anyway. Later that afternoon, the association's insurance representative contacted me. I sent the recorded survey, photographs, camera timestamps, Rebecca's emails, meeting minutes, and the signed work order. Eric provided his records separately. By Wednesday, Rebecca's language had changed. Her messages no longer said Summit Crest had authority. Now they said the board had acted on information available at the time. I printed that sentence and added it to the folder. Thursday evening, I attended the emergency meeting at the Summit Crest clubhouse. Folding chairs filled every row. Rebecca sat at the front table with her blue binder closed in front of her. An association attorney stood beside a portable screen while homeowners whispered around me. He began with the property boundary. Mercer Ridge was outside Summit Crest. Then he addressed the association documents. Nothing he had reviewed granted the board general authority to enter my property and remove the beacon merely because residents could see it from their homes. Rebecca leaned toward her microphone. The board approved the action based on legal guidance. Thomas raised his hand. Whose legal guidance? Rebecca looked toward the attorney. He adjusted the papers in front of him. I have not located a written opinion from Association Counsel authorizing entry onto Mr. Cole's parcel. One board member turned toward Rebecca. You told us counsel had cleared the removal. Rebecca opened her binder and started flipping pages. She stopped, turned back several pages, then closed it again. That blue binder had followed her to my gate, my workshop, and every meeting where she wanted people to believe the rules ended wherever she said they ended. Now it sat useless beneath her hands. The attorney continued. Restoration costs, contractor charges, professional review expenses, and any covered claims would have to be addressed through the association and its insurer according to the documented responsibility. Then the board voted to suspend Rebecca's authority over enforcement decisions pending an independent review. The motion passed. The review did not stop with my property. Residents began asking about other fines, access disputes, and architectural penalties Rebecca had approved. For the first time, she could not control which questions were allowed. Every important answer was already sitting in somebody else's folder. Outside, Thomas caught up with me beneath the parking lot lights. You let her do all the talking for 3 months, he said. I looked uphill toward the dark silhouette of Mercer Ridge. No, I said. I let her do all the writing. Emails led to meeting minutes. Meeting minutes led to the contractor. The contractor led to the signed order. The signed order led directly back to Rebecca. She had spent months building a trail she thought proved her authority. In the end, all anyone had to do was follow her signature. The beacon came back on 31 days after Rebecca ordered it removed. Restoration took longer than demolition, mostly because this time everybody involved insisted on doing things correctly. The original components were inspected. Damaged electrical hardware was replaced. The steel structure was evaluated before being returned to the ridge. Property records were confirmed, the historical site file was reviewed, and airport operations coordinated the return of the visual reference. Eric's company handled part of the restoration under the resolution process, and Summit Crest's insurer addressed the covered costs while the association dealt with the expenses created by its own decisions. Rebecca resigned as association president before the independent review was completed. Her final message to homeowners described the situation as an unfortunate dispute over community standards. I printed that email too. The review also forced Summit Crest to change its enforcement procedures. Property boundaries had to be verified before work could be authorized near neighboring parcels. Several unrelated fines were reconsidered after homeowners challenged the documentation behind them. Thomas called me one afternoon and said the clubhouse had become unusually quiet since Rebecca stepped down. Nobody seems interested in being king of the mountain anymore, he said. Good, I told him. There was never a throne. The evening the beacon returned, Michael Grant stood near the restored footing with a radio while I waited beside the electrical enclosure. The sun was dropping behind the Colorado mountains, turning the sky copper above the darkening foothills. Downhill, Summit Crest windows caught the last orange light. Rebecca's house was easy to spot near the upper street, all stone, glass, and that wide western deck built around her million-dollar view. Michael listened to his radio, confirmed the final check, then looked at me. Ready when you are. I rested my hand on the control. I remembered Rebecca standing at my gate saying it was just an old light. I remembered the yellow violation envelope, the blue binder, the contractor estimate, and every email where she had mistaken repetition for authority. Then I closed the switch. Click. The red light appeared above Mercer Ridge. It faded, then returned in its familiar rhythm. Red against deep blue. Simple. Quiet. Exactly where it belonged. I looked downhill. The glow reached the large windows of Rebecca's house and reflected faintly across the glass. She was standing on her deck. Even from that distance, I could tell she was looking toward the ridge. I did not need her apology, and I did not need to watch her lose anything else. The property was restored. The records were clear. That was enough. Later that night, I carried Dad's black binder into the workshop. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as I added a new section behind his old maintenance logs. Survey, emails, photographs, meeting minutes, restoration documents. I closed the binder, returned it to the gray metal cabinet, and heard the door click shut. Rebecca had believed authority meant deciding what she was allowed to see. Dad taught me something better. Real authority begins with knowing what you are allowed to touch. Outside, the red beacon crossed my workshop window again. Justice had never needed to shout. That night, it simply turned back on. If an HOA president ignored your survey, sent contractors onto your property, and removed documented infrastructure after you warned her in writing, what would you do first? Tell me in the comments. And if you enjoy stories where arrogance collides with evidence, property lines, and consequences nobody bothered to check, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because sometimes the strongest response is not shouting louder. It is keeping the email, saving the timestamp, preserving the survey, and letting the other person's signature tell the story.